All very powerful ideas. Speaking of purpose as well, Professor Brian Cox in the UK, he has often spoken that humans find purpose in finding new frontiers. And in the past, it was exploring Earth, exploring the oceans, and then discovering new things. And now that we have, in a way, discovered as much as we have about the Earth, even though the deep oceans are still yet unexplored, he says the next frontier for us would be our solar system, and then beyond that, naturally exoplanets out there. So I would like to now take you to space exploration. We are fortunate enough to stay in a country which has a very active space program. Not many countries have that. Earlier this year, UAE launched the Hope Probe towards Mars, and within the same month, NASA launched the Perseverance Rover. So a lot of expeditions, a lot of adventures out to Mars right now. I want to check with you, what can we discover from Mars in the coming few years that will teach us a lot more about maybe exoplanets out there, and also about the existence of life? What key information can we expect to find from these probes and also future probes and rovers that we might send out that will really enhance our knowledge and also help us in our goal towards human flourishment?
Yeah, just a little correction so that the viewers don't think we recorded this last year. The UAE and NASA and the Chinese sent their probe last year, okay? This was in July 2020. They arrived last February because it takes about 6.5, 7 months over there. So you were pointing to the arrival of these probes, and we are in June, just so that people don't think, oh, this is an old conversation and they're just, bringing it out.
Well, Einstein said time is relative, right? So you never know.
Yeah, true. So why Mars, and what can we discover on Mars? Well, first of all, even though I personally think the chances are very small, but doesn't matter what I think, the main objective is to try to find any form of life on Mars. I think that's the big prize. If we find even a bacteria, if we find even a little, tiny little thing, even pre-bacteria, some complex molecule that was just, trying to make something and it didn't succeed because Mars evolved in a different way, that will be extremely important. Why? For exoplanets and for Earth. Because we want to know, how easily does life appear on any planet? Planet like Earth, planet like Mars. There was, if you remember, a few months back, an announcement that there were some astronomers who thought that they had found this gas called phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus, which presumably can only be produced by bacteria. And so they said, there's phosphine, large quantities of phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus, then there must be some bacteria somewhere. And people say, wait a minute, doesn't Venus have a temperature of 450 degrees? How can you have even bacteria? And people said, yeah, but we're talking about the high levels of the atmosphere where there is a layer of the atmosphere where the temperature is just about right at about 15, 20 degrees. So if the bacteria, sort of escaped and went there, then maybe they are releasing this phosphine. So even in the environment of Venus, there could be some primitive forms of life, bacteria or something. So we want to check. And by the way, just yesterday or the day before, NASA announced 2 missions to Venus in the coming years. One of them, or at least one of them, it has this almost specific purpose of trying to measure these gases that are indicative of bacteria of some forms of life. So the biggest question in astrobiology, now we call it, is there life, and what form and in what conditions? Mars is very cold. Mars has a very, very weak atmosphere, has very patchy magnetic field. Venus has a very weak magnetic field, but a very thick atmosphere, very hot. We are in the middle. We are the perfect planet, and so on. So we want to know, just these 3 planets sort of represent the range of possibilities of exoplanets out there.
Sorry,
so
Professor,
we find bacteria.
Sorry, I apologize for the interruption, but I just wanted to explore this point a bit further. If we do find microbial life on Mars and Venus, we've had this longest history of rumors. In the past, I believe they used to think that Venus had these grid-like patterns, very definite lines and grids. So they thought that only a civilization could have made that. And then they found it was some kind of, I think, sulfur stream. I'm not sure, that really caused it. But what I will check with you mentioned microbial life on Mars. And if we do find it, that would be the biggest question that we can answer. Would you consider that good news? Because there is the argument.
It'll be amazing news. It'll be absolutely amazing news, because it will mean that life can appear in different environments and more than once. Some people say, yeah, but maybe it appeared on Mars, and then we know that there are some meteorites that come from Mars to Earth, so maybe life here is really the result of the original primitive forms that would have appeared on Mars, if there is anything there. But if we find life anywhere else in our environment, even on other moons of Jupiter or Saturn, or even on exoplanets of nearby stars, then it will be an extraordinary development, because it will mean, first of all, exoplanets, we're only exploring nearby exoplanets within a few hundred light years, maybe a couple of thousand light years, which is nothing compared to our galaxy, which has a diameter of 100,000 light years. So we're only exploring our neighborhood. If, suppose you go out in your backyard or in your neighborhood and you start to find some insects and stuff, and you say, if I found insects just by going out just a few meters from my home, then there must be insects everywhere. I mean, why would the insects only live in my neighborhood, right? So that would mean that life exists everywhere in the Milky Way. And why only the Milky Way? The Milky Way is just a very average galaxy. Then it must exist almost everywhere. It means life appears more easily than we have thought. That's what it will mean. As I said, the chances are very low, but that would be the biggest if we discover any microbial life or any bacteria or whatever on Mars or in the atmosphere of Venus, or even on any other moon of Jupiter or Saturn or exoplanet, if we find any such thing in the next 10, 20 years, it will have momentous consequences.
I would like to just provide context to that question, because I would also consider it good news. But why I ask, and especially if we find on moons of Jupiter, Titan and Europa, and I've got my money on Europa. But why I asked the question about good news is because there's an argument called the grid filter argument, which I'm sure you've come across, which is put forward by Nick Bostrom as well lately, where he says that if we do find life on Mars, it would be very bad news for us, because that would bring the probability of finding life from 1 out of trillions of planets out there in the universe down to 2 out of 9 within our solar system, which is a big jump in probability, which would then imply that the great filter that we assume, which has caused this great silence and the Fermi paradox, that is ahead of us and not before us. So that would mean that human civilization is doomed in a way. So what he said, in a way, even though I find it a very cynical, very pessimistic approach, because I definitely want to find life out there, it would mean that if we do find microbial life, means that the great filter is not behind us, because life can emerge easily, but it's ahead of us, and most civilizations will have to cross that at some point.
Yeah, and why be pessimistic about it? It will mean, okay, be careful, people. There is a danger, there is a probability that we will destroy ourselves because life has appeared somewhere, but somehow it destroyed itself. We don't even know that for sure. That even if we find life on other, and I love Europa too, by the way, on Europa or Titan or Ganymede or any of them, Enceladus, or exoplanets of any, and then we don't find more advanced life, it doesn't mean that life evolved but then destroyed itself all over the Milky Way, and we are the only lucky ones so far, but we will destroy ourselves because that's what the others have done. We say, no, first of all, it doesn't mean that they all destroyed themselves. Maybe they evolved into some other form, maybe they left the galaxy, maybe they went underground, or wanted to protect themselves from radiation, who knows? There's all kinds of possibilities of what that means. But even if they destroy themselves altogether, why does it mean that I have to destroy myself? Maybe it will force us to be wiser, to think properly, to do it properly, and to send outposts, to send colonies to the moon, to Mars, to Europa, to other places, so that even if we just destroy ourselves, we still have a little group on the moon, a little group on Mars, a little group on Europa, and it doesn't mean that we have to destroy ourselves. So I don't buy this, great filter ahead of us, we are all doomed. I don't believe that. I think the more excitement we can find, the more discoveries we can make, the happier we should be.